Welcome to Are You an Accident of Nature? Part 10, Fossils. Most people don't know that the fossil record does not support evolution. Even in Charles Darwin, in his book, The Origin of the Species, wrote that the fossil record doesn't support his theory. He wrote that the transition fossils, the little small changes from one to the next, are missing. They are still missing. It's a serious problem for evolution because the fossil evidence doesn't support it, despite the claims of the evolutionists. In fact, we now know that the interpretation of fossils is very subjective. Even amongst themselves, the paleoanthropologists, those studying the fossils, they disagree among themselves. One thinks this, another thinks that. And of course, everyone thinks that the fossils that they found are older than they really are, because that's how you get recognition and interest and, as it turns out, grant money to fund your research. So we find that in the fossil record, there's things that are out of sequence. In other words, evolution said A came after B, but in the fossil record, sometimes we find it the other way around. That's a serious problem. There's no transition fossils for things like, say, from mice to bats. Or worse than that, there's no transition fossils from invertebrates to vertebrates. Invertebrates are creatures without a backbone. Vertebrates are creatures with a backbone. There is a huge difference between those structurally, in bone structure, in muscles, in nerves, in ligaments, and such, but no transition fossils. We can say rightly that evolution is a theory without backbone in the fossil record. In general, transitions are missing, and to call anything a transition fossil is very subjective. That's why in our earlier videos I focused on information, because information is, we can measure that in a non-subjective way, quantifiable. We know how DNA codes for proteins, and we know the probability of getting the correct DNA sequence for a single typical protein by chance, and it's a mathematical kind of thing, and it absolutely disproves evolution. And neither can you go from simple life to more complex life by adding information complexity. The ratio of bad to good organisms, bad to good mutations, is phenomenal, and there's no way, given the amount of time and population, that even evolutionists oppose, that you could get an increase in information that would lead to more complex life. So transition fossils in general are a subjective kind of thing, but we know some things that are non-subjective. We know transitions are missing, and we know that some of them appear in the wrong order. So we're just making the same point. Here at the bottom of the screen, you see invertebrate fossils, like clams and things like that. In the top, you see a fish. It's a vertebrate with a backbone. There should be many, probably hundreds of transitions at least between the two. Zero in the fossil record. We have billions of fossil fish, and we have billions of shellfish and other invertebrate fossils. There's plenty of them, but we don't find transitions. So there's no scientifically rigorous proof of evolution producing an increase in complexity. Only subjective interpretations, guesses, assumptions. Wishful thinking. Now take a look at this diagram showing different kinds of dogs. Now, if the evolutionists dug this up, they might think that these dogs came from some kind of change in complexity or information. But we know all those dogs came from a common wolf-like ancestor. And the way that these dogs were created was by careful breeding. When the breeders are breeding dogs, they deliberately make selections of which dog to breed. And what they are doing is they're not adding new information. That's the point. They are removing information. They're selecting out the genes that don't give them the desired effect. Or they're selecting out combinations of genes, perhaps, that don't give them the desired effect. Maybe they want a really big dog, and they breed that way, or a little dog. But they are do it by removing information. If you have a little tiny dog, and you breed 2 of them, you will probably never get back to the wolf-like ancestor or the Great Dane. Why? Because information has been removed. That is just such a key concept that defeats evolution, because we know this for sure, that you cannot create information by mutations plus natural selection. You can see an earlier video on that. No information by chance, DNA. And there's going to be another one in the series that will be interesting also, humans going extinct. That's probably going to be even a better one to show that you cannot get information by mutations plus natural selection. I think a lot of people are going to like that video when it comes out fairly soon here. Now, this diagram here purports to show how a coyote-like animal, sort of a dog-like animal, evolved into a whale. And this is a series of artist drawings. It's important to remember that's just what they are, artist drawings. That is one of the best evidences of transitions that the evolutionists use. They have a real problem finding anything that really looks solid. So this is the one they frequently use. It's used, for example, in Carl Zimmer's book, Evolution, the Triumph of an Idea. Who's Carl Zimmer? Well, he's a columnist who writes for the New York Times. He's written quite a few articles supporting evolution. So he's a pro-evolution person. Now, Richard Dawkins, possibly the most famous evolutionary biologist alive, also an atheist, as in his book, he uses that same diagram. I'm just trying to give you an idea that this is like among the best. These authors think that this is about one of the best diagrams to prove there are transition fossils. But as it turns out, it's faulty information. You know, someone went back and they checked into some of the fossils and they found, oh, what do you know? The fossils aren't there. So look at Rhodocetus. See the circle in the middle? There's a fluked tail drawn on that animal. Well, as it turns out, this was speculation. Philip Gingrich at the University of Michigan, who was responsible for discovering and making popular the Rhodocetus fossil, thought that based on the other bones he saw and his imagination, his bias, that there might be a fluke tail on there. So he had one drawn on. As it turned out, someone went and interviewed Mr. Gingrich, and while they were there, they looked at the fossils, the skeleton, and there was no fluke tail, and asked him about it. And he now recanted, based on a closer look at some of the other evidence, that there was no fluked tail. So what we see is this is, in general, just speculative artwork. And if we look at the actual source listed on the page here, it says source, art by Deborah Peruggi. The best evidence that evolutionists are offering up turns out to be artwork. And we see that through many museums. You go into these museums and they have these dioramas and these murals, and it's artwork. You understand? It's not real science. How about the geologic column? You may have seen a diagram something like this that purports to show how the complexity of life increased over time. Well, down here in the Precambrian layer, they have found, Precambrian rocks, they've now found pollen. Now, this is published in Nature magazine. It's a very prestigious scientific magazine. But the problem for that is supposedly flowering plants did not evolve until many, many millions of years later, way up closer in time to us. You can't have pollen without flowering plants. That's the point. So how did that pollen get down there in the earliest rocks? Now this comes from an article in Nature magazine. It's called "Occurrence of Pollen and Spores in the Roraima Formation of Venezuela and British Guiana." Nature magazine, volume 210. It's dated April 16th, 1966. So Nature is considered by many to be the preeminent science magazine in the world. How do you explain that? It doesn't fit evolution. Well, that's not the only example of fossils or out of sequence. Consider these horse-like hoofprints in the Grand Canyon. There's a jackknife at the bottom there for scale, but it's a fairly large animal that made these. And the problem is that these horse-like footprints appear in a rock layer called Esplanade sandstone in the Grand Canyon. And it's a very well-defined rock layer. But the rock layers in the Grand Canyon are well documented. They're well studied. The problem is that horses didn't supposedly evolve until 55 million years ago, but these hoofprints are in a rock layer that's supposedly 315 million years ago. That's a big problem. More than that, the horse-like footprints are over 1,000 feet below where they think the first dinosaurs evolved. So how can that be? Because dinosaurs were supposed to come before large mammals, like horses. Well, the footprints can't belong to dinosaurs, right? Because the dinosaurs weren't supposed to be around there. But the footprints can't belong to horses, supposedly, because, according to evolution, because the horses were supposed to come a long time after the dinosaurs. So this is just another case where we see that the evidence, the rock-hard evidence, if you will, in a well-studied formation like the Grand Canyon, disproves the idea of evolution. Here's another instructive thing to see. Here's a Polystrate tree fossil. Polystrate means poly for many, straight for strata. So you can see this tree goes through multiple rock layers, quite a few. And that's obviously the tree didn't grow up through the rock layers, but these rock layers were deposited very rapidly in a flood-like or water deposition environment. It must have been a huge flood to deposit this many layers of sediment, to form all those layers so quickly. Think about Noah's flood. Another evidence for a worldwide flood is this imprint of a fossil clamshell. In fact, this particular shell came from 1,700 feet above sea level in New York State in a shale. But we see marine fossils, sea creature fossils, at the highest elevations all over the earth. Even in the Himalayan mountains, where Mount Everest is, we see sea fossils. Pikes Peak in the American Rocky Mountains, we see sea fossils. So it is evident that water indeed did cover the whole earth, just as the Bible tells us. Now, people ask, well, where did the water go? Well, those mountains were formed by uplift. So the amount of water in the deepest part of the oceans, if you flattened out all the land in the oceans and on the dry earth, there would be enough water to cover the whole earth quite well. So what happened is, evidently, The oceans got deeper and the mountains got pushed up. But the point being is the fossil evidence is irrefutable that that the whole earth was covered with water. Another evidence of a worldwide flood is the Tapeats sandstone and similar formations. Now, a sandstone is laid down by water action. It's not, and the Tapeats sandstone extends through much of North America. It extends for thousands of miles. It goes from Texas in the south all the way up to northern Canada in the Arctic Circle. It goes from Nevada in western United States all the way to Maine on the eastern coast of the United States. How could you get a water deposit to put down a sandstone of that extent? It was a global flood. That's the only reasonable explanation. And finally, we're just taking a quick run through fossils here. There's been a recent find in just a few decades ago. A Tyrannosaurus rex bone was sliced open. And when they did it, Mary Schweitzer and her lab tech put some of the material inside the bone, and they found red blood cells on something that was supposed to be 65 million years old. Let's just read the quote here from Mary Schweitzer. "It is exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course, I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones, after all, are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long?" That comes from the Museum of the Rockies in Science, the 1994 July 9th publication. That's just a really quick overview. In general, the fossils do not support evolution, and there is a lot of information on this. There's some great organizations, ICR.org, that's the Institute for Creation Research, great organization. And also creation.com, that's Creation Ministries website, another great organization. And also answersingenesis.org. All three of them are top-notch, and you can go to their websites. There's all sorts of scientific articles. You want to do some research on creation science and disproving evolution, these are the places to go. Well, thank you for joining us. I hope you're interested in perhaps giving your own presentations. You can freely download the PowerPoints used in this video series that I've been giving here at educate7.com. You can edit them a little bit, add to them, take away, and use them at your university or your school or your church or just your family group. It's a great way to inform people that solid science supports God's Word. If you're interested in knowing more about God, check out how7.org, HOW and the number 7.org. Thanks for joining us.